It's like, how do you stop a chicken?
Just letting everybody know we're live on YouTube now.
Right. Fun. Thanks for letting us know.
No, that's okay. It's always good to know these things.
Okay, that's embedded in the page, Elliot.
Okay, great. I'll just check it and make sure I can see we're live on YouTube. I'll check Arts Front.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey.
How you going?
Hi, Michelle. Hi. I'm just going to grab a charger for my phone because I'm using hotspot.
Hey, Michelle.
It's got a blue screen.
Michelle's the Ausland interpreter today.
Go in front of the blue wall out there.
Okay, yep, that's running live on the website as well as YouTube, so that's good. Okay, perfect. Alrighty, so now that we're live on both, I'm going to mute myself and disappear into the background.
Bye. Bye.
So Alex, you're good to start at midday when it clicks over to midday. We just keep the YouTube up in case there's any issues in the lead up.
Okay, great. And can I just go from 12 on my computer? Great.
What is the time? It's a couple of minutes to 12.
It's 11:58 according to my computer.
Brenda's jigsaw puzzle. One of the students learned it to me. This is quite fun. Looks excruciating. Yeah, I haven't been willing to get involved in it. I'm a bit jigsaw puzzled out at the moment. We need about 5 in a row.
I forgot to ask, how many people have you been getting sort of on average on these?
Around about 30.
Wow, that's great. And a lot of the same folks?
So I just muted you guys, Vados, and I'll unmute you soon. Oh, maybe I'll better unmute them now. Hang on.
I'm tuning up. I'm tuning up.
I'm muting now.
So we can control the muting for you guys and we'll...
Can we have a rehearsal or not?
Oh, sorry. No, there's like one.
No.
No? Okay.
We've got to tune up.
We've got to turn up.
If you mute them. Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Little Lunch Online. I'm Alex Kelly, and today I'm going to be joined by both the amazing Jen Ray and the wonderful Vados. I'm just going to share a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off with some tunes and a conversation. So just to let you know, I'm joining from Dja Dja Wurrung country here in the Central Goldfields in Victoria. And I'd like to acknowledge that from wherever people are tuning in across this continent, sovereignty has never been ceded, and this is all Aboriginal land and Torres Strait Island land. I'd encourage everybody to introduce themselves in the chat panel. If you haven't clicked on, there's a chat button down the bottom of your screen, and you can pop out the chat panel, let people know where you're from, what country you're on. All of these sessions are being recorded. They go for 30 minutes and they're being live streamed now, and you can watch them afterwards on the Little Lunch Online, llol.com.au website. Please keep your mics muted if you're not chatting. And if you'd like to use closed captions, again, down the bottom, there's a caption button. We've got Marissa and Lachlan captioning today. And if you would like to click on the video with Michelle, who's providing the Auslan interpretation, she's online as well, I believe. So thanks everyone, and thanks for having us. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Jen, and I won't spend too much time introducing ourselves. We'll just sort of get into the work, but Jen and I have some quite interesting parallels and also very big distinctions in our practice. But we've both been very active in response to COVID-19, and we have also both been very active in the climate space. And so I guess I'm really interested in unpacking a bit about what it is that a crisis reveals about society and how we're responding, looking at both micro local projects and macro systems and structural projects, both in the creative field, but also in really practical and immediate work in communities, in mutual aid and food systems, etc. But before we come to that, I'm very excited to introduce the fantastic Vardos. It's a pleasure to have some live music today. So over to you three. Welcome.
Hello. Would you like us just to start playing? Yeah. Yes? Okay. Go. Cool.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vardos. I have a little story here about Vardos. We launched a community market garden 3 years ago in our suburb in the north of Moreland. And it was Vardos that was the band that sort of kicked everything off. And one of the beautiful things about Vardos is that you can't actually stand still and listen to them. Your body actually just automatically starts to feel really jovial and so forth. And over time, Alana has, you know, we had a conversation over some mushroom soup that Fair made. And then also, my daughter lost her favorite teddy bear. And one day, Alana walked by and knocked on our door and said, I see a really sad teddy bear that's wedged in between the fence and this raised garden bed. It looks like a really well-loved one. is it yours? And it'd been missing for weeks. And it was like, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, you know, and my daughter still carries this teddy bear around. So, I mean, it was Alana saved the day.
I'd seen it for about 3 weeks leading up to it, you know, like this poor sad thing. Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I certainly can't wait to dance to some live music with people again, but bopping in my chair was not a bad substitute in the middle of a work day. So thanks, Jen, for agreeing to chat. We sort of thought we'd be quite informal and talk about some of the things that we've been doing and some of the things we've been reading and reflecting on. And I suppose just to frame the discussion that, you know, there's very unique things about a pandemic compared to the climate crisis, but there's also lessons to be learned, I think, in any crisis. Obviously, climate change can be sometimes fast and sometimes slow, but this pandemic's been very fast. And so it's taken us a long time to kind of be processing what we're seeing. But Arundhati Roy talked about the idea that a crisis like this is a kind of societal MRI. It allows us to, it reveals the systems and it shows us what lies beneath. And sometimes we're told stories, you know, I think when we look at something, say, like the toilet paper narrative, that narrative was really pushed, that we were selfish, that we were hoarders. But actually, when people have done, there was a really great piece in the Saturday paper about supermarket supply chains. And they actually found that people aren't really hoarding things. People have been advised to buy up to 2 weeks supplies if they could. And actually it's our food system that is, and the supply chains and the way that distribution works that are so fragile that it couldn't actually accommodate that. So I think the role of artists and the stories that we tell about who we are in moments of crisis are also really critical. So I'm grateful to be discussing this in this kind of forum. And I suppose the kind of counterpoint to the selfish hoarders narrative has been the incredible proliferation of community support that we've seen. And some of that is very informal. Some people have started informal groups that have formalized. And Jen, I'm really excited to hear about the work you've been doing around food security in your community, because you've taken some of these things that people are doing in very, you know, small street-based organising to kind of a suburb-wide scale very quickly. So do you want to share a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. So I think like my work with Fair Share Fair has always been really looking at food security. You know, being in this field for about 15 years, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to think about future conflicts in terms of climate impacts, and food seemed to be, you know, something that just kept emerging over and over again. And it seemed like a narrative that I could engage with, because oftentimes with climate change, the focus goes on energy or population, and yet food is, you know, constitutes for 33% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's something that's relatable. It's something that we can talk about difficult subject matter through over meals and so forth. And so when my partner and I moved up to the North of Moreland, we moved into the most food insecure part of Moreland. You know, Brunswick being at the south and Falconer being at the north. And what we noticed is that we had a really, really culturally diverse neighborhood, and but we didn't have any grocery stores, any major grocery stores. We didn't have any cafes. You know, it was a bit of a culture shock moving from Brunswick up to the north. But we didn't want that lifestyle. And so, but what we noticed was that there was problems in terms of accessing fresh fruit and vegetables. And so we started working with a local horticulturalist, and we converted the third green on a bowling club into a market garden 3 years ago. And it was very much about community gathering, more of a gathering and sort of an event space. And we did everything through alternative economies of trade. So we were building the garden with volunteer labor, and then in exchange for fruits and vegetables. But when COVID struck, we couldn't actually grow in that way anymore because we couldn't gather in the space. And we had all of these fruits and vegetables that were just sitting there, and we were sitting waiting to find out, you know, could we go in? Could we, as the people who run it, go into the space, or could our volunteers run it? And vegetables were just getting too big, and we weren't able to eat them. And so talking to colleagues with the Open Food Network and some farmers that I know, we were learning that, you know, with the markets closing and so forth, we had a distribution crisis. And, you know, Coles had, you know, announced that they were hiring 7,000 skilled laborers and so forth, you know, to stock shelves. And I was going, why don't we put that money into distribution, or how could we put this into improving the food system? And so my partner and I convened a Zoom chat on April 7th with 16 different people who are involved in food in some sort of capacity in the North. And we decided to start Faulkner Commons. And we are focused on food aggregation, distribution, and access. And as of this week, we're doing emergency food relief. We're partnered with like the Community Grocer, Open Table, a Whole Foods Collective, and a local chef who's lost his job, and he's doing prepared meals. And within 24 hours of not even promoting the food relief, we reached capacity. So that's what a lot of energy is being put towards right now.
Yeah, and how are you, like this is not something that you're just doing for the short term, it's something that you'd already been thinking about. So you already had relationships and networks to convene that Zoom call on April the 7th. And I presume that this is something you're imagining going past this immediate crisis. How do you think about short-term and long-term at the same time? And how are you building it? In a way that will respond to the acute crisis and be preparing for a longer-term kind of organizational setup?
Yeah, I think I bring sort of that practice-led research into this, like where you're actually learning as you go, and you're bringing people into that mindset of experimentation, right, and responsiveness. So we don't know where we're going with it. In terms of starting it, or Faulkner Commons specifically, is that we've said it's a 6-month pilot, and it's responsive to the COVID crisis. We're really interested in responding to the crisis, but also the recovery. So everyone's come along in this experimental phase for 6 months. And then at the end of September, what we'll do is we'll go through an evaluation, and we'll say, you know, what was working, what wasn't working, where do we want to go with the next steps, and so forth. I have a lot of difficulty personally going beyond 5 years. I tend to right now think 5 years ahead, different scenarios, and then work my way back.
That's already longer than a government's term, so you're doing better than a lot of the leadership.
Yeah.
I just want to check as well, just that we get very excited, so let's just maintain a slightly slower pace as well for the captioning and interpreting.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, so just, sorry, you were saying you maintain the 5-year length, and I think that's there's a challenge. Another thought that a really wonderful frame that Arundhati Roy has given us is this idea of the pandemic as a portal, and this question of what is it that we will leave behind and what is it that we would choose to carry through with us. And it sort of strikes me that we've got this kind of intense challenge at the moment where we have to do a lot of things at the same time. We have to respond to the acute crisis, both in terms of the immediate health impacts, but also the kind of ripple effects on our economy and all of our other systems. We have to stop terrible things from being locked in. I mean, we're hearing about these ideas of like the gas-led recovery, and that we need our kind of fossil fuel industries to help the economy snap back and all this kind of stuff. And then we also have to be imagining and articulating different visions for the future at the same time. And doing all of those three things is incredibly tricky, but it's one of the reasons why I think artists are so critical in this moment, but also why I think your practice is really profound, because you're working in really practical, immediate ways, but you're setting up new systems that challenge the old systems. And you're bringing a community with you through, you know, the really practical you know, sharing of food and the need there that is going to only increase as the kind of economic side of this hits. But I want to sort of come across a bit more to your arts practice, and how do you kind of join the dots between that very practical systems thinking about food and distribution to art making and narrative and research work?
Yeah.
Aside from staying up at 5 a.m. to do your art because you're spending your days doing.
Yeah. I guess, gosh, I've been thinking a lot about, you know, what the future of art making is, and sort of the institutional support that we've relied upon for a very long time, and how fragile it has become. And I think this crisis in many ways, you know, has revealed its fragility, but also how artists have mobilized, you know, in terms of material aid networks, and, you know, really looking at how our skills and knowledges can tap into communities, and, you know, and what we have to offer. And I think this is a really great time, you know, where we are stepping up to those challenges and starting to see, you know, different hybrids forming, different ways in which, you know, art and life come together. And so I feel like the boundaries of what constitutes art right now, it's blurry. You know, and for myself, it's, everything just feeds into each other, you know, and I find that I'm really engaged in sort of processes of creativity, but they're also having these practical implications as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things, especially for those of us that are carers or parents and are working from home, even those of us that already knew how to work from home quite well, that's changed because home's changed. And yeah, these separations between things are, you know, time's gone bendy, boundaries are strange. Yeah, so I think keeping a handle on things is particularly tricky at the moment, and I agree. It's arts practice, community building processes, mutual aid processes. A lot of these things are folding in on each other, and I suppose I'll just sort of take the opportunity, because I know I'm speaking with many, you know, great thinkers in the art sector, is that I have been observing, you know, and participating in the campaigns, you know, from artists to call for, you know, greater support of our sector from the government, and also for arts workers to be able to benefit from JobKeeper and other schemes that have been set up. And I guess I've had some concern that we still operate in a bit of a silo. Again, it's one of the reasons I really admire your practice, Jen, because, you know, I've sort of been seeing lots of other campaigns for migrant workers or people on different visas, or you know, asylum seekers or other casual workers looking to get job keepers, but I haven't seen our art sector kind of locking arms, you know, on the virtual picket line with those other workers. And I wonder, how do you think we can get out of our silo as artists more, Jen, and connect with other groups and other campaigns?
Yeah, I think one way is actually thinking about kind of doing a skills and knowledge audit of of what we, you know, what we bring to the table. I think artists bring a lot to the table. What I've really learned through the Refuge Project was that if anybody's not familiar with Refuge, it's through Arts House. We've been rehearsing disaster scenarios since 2016, working with emergency services and all different sorts of professionals in a sort of transdisciplinary context. And one of the things that we really learned through that process is that everybody has their legs under the same table. And on that table, we are all putting offerings. Right. And what we've learned through that process is that artists bring a lot of different skills and knowledges to the table. And so I encourage anyone in the creative sector to really think about, you know, what you bring. You know, we've got meaning makers. We have people who can, you know, storytellers, and people who can craft, you know, incredible experiences and so forth. And those are the skills and knowledges that are missing in this space right now. I've been in here for so long, and it's amazing how an artist can translate something you know, that is sort of a benign sentence into something that is meaning making to a wide range of audiences and so forth. And I just think that right now, that's a really great stepping stone. It moves us out of this survival mode into something of abundance.
I think that's a really critical point. I mean, I think especially when we look at what's happening with the way in which facts themselves have become contestable and fake news, and you know, the rise of also as a catch-all phrase, kind of conspiracy theories that we're seeing, and questions around power and vaccinations, etc. Meaning making and you know, sound analysis and the ability to craft narratives that we can share, and shared analysis, I think, has become even more important than previously before. And I'll share a link in the chat. One project I've been working on with the Commons Social Change Library is just setting up a continent-wide reading group called the Reset Reading Group, because we're sort of really thinking about how is it that we can build our kind of collective muscle of analysis and narrative? How can we share ideas? Because it feels like even, depth of thinking and facts themselves are under siege in this kind of crisis as well. So I agree that meaning making becomes really important. Where are you finding inspiration at the moment? We did talk about we said we might talk about what we'd been reading. Yeah. Where have you been finding meaning?
Yeah, can I just actually just make a comment there about what you were saying there? I went to the National Climate Emergency Summit in Melbourne. I think it was in February, so before COVID sort of became what it became. And I found it really alarming, the lack of artists in the space, or the narratives, or like any sort of creativity in general. And what was alarming is that there was a lot of war language, you know, things around, you know, that evoke sort of violence, or that, you know, mobilization, you know, about sacrifice and austerity. And I was like, if there were artists on the stage, they might be talking about people power, sharing, or collectivity, or mobilization, you know, more of this sort of abundance language. And I think that sort of showed to me anyway, where these two narratives are right now in terms of response in crisis. But you asked about what am I reading? There's kind of I'm rereading. I'm doing a lot of rereading. And so like one is like Radical Homemakers. This is by Shannon Hayes.
I also learned to make sourdough during the pandemic. I have to say, I am one of those.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things about Radical Homemakers, and this is also going back to what you were saying about toilet paper. I started tracking the different waves of panic, and what it sort of went from like toilet paper, hand sanitizers, to, you know, dry goods. Then it was office equipment, school desks, computers, and then it went to like arts and crafts supplies, trampolines, alcohol, gardening seeds, different home improvement, adopting animals, camping gear, flu vaccinations. It's been these sorts of different waves. And one of the things about Shannon Hayes is that she talks about these 3 steps in terms of survival and so forth. And one of them is this acknowledgement of what you're missing in terms of skills and knowledges, you know, and that's sort of, you announce it, then you spend a period of time trying to collect it. And so it might be taking online courses, or it might be tapping into different resources and so forth. But that stops us in a survivalist individual sort of paradigm. And what she talks about is about connection. And that the 3rd step is you don't need to learn everything. What you actually need to know is to learn what you know and the skills that you have and how you can contribute to the whole. And that's how we build community. And so, yeah, so this is a book I read quite a few years ago, but it's gone back onto my reading list.
Yeah, I think though that there's the kind of dominant narrative, and then there's our own lived experience. And I think when you hear the scarcity frame or the siege mentality frame, that generates fear. And shuts us down. And I think Lenine was talking in the comments about talking to artists who aren't sure what to make at the moment. And I think that, yeah, stress and poverty and pressure do that. But I think there's another parallel, and I've been hearing this from other people I've been in conversation with, where they have been reminded of something very fundamental about being human and being in community, and have felt a genuine recognition of interdependence. And I know that this is a common thread that emerges in disasters. And I know that you do work with the Creative Recovery Network, and Rebecca Solnit writes about this as well, in terms of oftentimes we actually see different ways of behaving rather than the stories that we're being told about who we are. And I think that this is also one of these other sort of portal moments where we can choose that abundance frame, where we can, you know, it applies to our border policies, it applies to, you know, sharing and generosity from a community level to a kind of large scale policy and distribution of wealth question. But it seems very fundamental to me, because often in crisis we see how moved people are by that real fundamental interdependence actually being expressed often by the forced kind of circumstances, and yet we're told these other stories. And it's a real, I think it's a really, really critical point, because there's also, and I'm introducing very big ideas in our last 3 minutes, but there are also very large conversations emerging around fascism and eco-fascism, and ideas of, well, humans are the virus and humans are selfish and etc. But actually, I think what we are seeing and remembering, actually, I think we're remembering that we are actually generous and have great spirit and are interdependent on each other. And when we are able to express that, when we set up systems and structures that enable that, it's beautiful. And we know we're going to be okay, even with all these impending crises.
Yeah, I mean, in the work that we're doing around COVID's impact on food systems, one of the farmers said, you know, we need to have this shift. It's, you know, it's not a problem with the supply chain, right? It's actually a problem with the values chain and where we place our values in these times. Whatever we put our energies into and our money into and ideas around, that's what will have power at the end of the crisis, you know, or in the recovery if there is an end to this crisis. And so I think that, you know, the words from that one farmer just going, yeah, that's exactly it. You know, it is around values and purpose at this time, that this language that's being used around, you know, war efforts and so forth, we can actually shift that, you know, into something that is actually placing value in things that are about what we can do and what we do have, and bringing others along with us.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when we center care, both in our own behavior, which I think is a kind of natural human instinct, but if we can see that, if we can see care more centered in our policies and reflected in the way in which we lead and are led out of this or towards the new other strange normals, I think the world would be a very, very different place. And I really do think that that's a huge role and responsibility for artists as well in this time. Do you have any last words or other books, ideas, things to point people to?
Yeah, gosh, right now the amount of books, the audiobooks, these sorts of things. But like, I mean, I'm looking at like things like this one here, like The Seeds of Resistance, right? Like there's really great storytelling. You know, I think narratives around mobilization and people power are really fantastic. You know, this here is about a food cooperative in Toronto. You know, that it's some of these skills in which the some of these mobilization groups that, you know, that stopped apartheid or stopped other sorts of, you know, like the Vietnam War and so forth. These sorts of narratives are just as important to tell. And so, yeah, I guess that's my leaving point is to really focus on the good stories and on the positive things in history that we can sort of pick some of their modes of practice and so forth and bring them to the now.
Brilliant. On that note, I would also recommend a fantastic documentary called How to Survive a Plague, which is about ACT UP New York in response to the AIDS crisis, and it shows a creative response in response to a pandemic. It's a really, and it's also a really beautiful movement documentary. I'll share the link in the chat, but I recommend the Commons Social Change Library for a plethora of resources. To wrap up, I'm inviting Jen to collaborate on my next project coming up soon, which is called Assembly for the Future. So look out for that. Jen, how can people find out about your work? What's the best?
Yeah, you can go to jenrayis.com or fairsharefair.com. So
Wonderful.
I can put that in here as well.
The archive of this will be up online. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Artsfront, Ferals, to our captioners, to our interpreter, so that's Marissa, Lachlan and Michelle, and also to the wonderful Vardos for sharing beautiful tunes with us today. And go forth and be abundant. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone. Bye.